come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face. First of all, do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people.
I wouldn't want to go there. That was a stark warning for illegals from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem during her tour of the Cecot prison in El Salvador this week. During that trip, she also signed an agreement with El Salvador's Minister of Justice for sharing of criminal records so that these fugitives aren't inadvertently released into the United States. Noem praised El Salvador for taking in these terrorists and said the United States will continue to utilize this critically important resource.
Already in 2025, El Salvador has received 51 flights and another one landed today. Cecot is a very unique facility in the fact that it is only housing terrorists. El Salvador recognizes that these gang members are members of a terrorist organization, which is exactly how President Trump is approaching MS-13 and TDA as well.
Cecot is a place I've been, and it's unlike any other place I've ever been. Thousands of MS-13 are racked and stacked, not inhumanely, but certainly not with the comforts of U.S. prisons. Today, the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to allow them to continue to deport Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act after a lower court injunction. In her appeal, the acting Solicitor General Sarah Harris wrote that the case sets forth a clear choice between whether the president or the judiciary will set policy for sensitive national security cases. Harris made the argument, the Constitution supplies the answer. The president and the republic cannot afford a different choice. Beyond the policy arguments, telling the story of Cecot has powerful force in deterrence. International criminal gangs won't want to be apprehended in El Salvador, the United States, or any other country that would send prisoners to Cecot. For this story to be told, it requires incredible talent in the area of photojournalism. Phil Holsinger has undertaken this task for all of us, for the world. This photojournalist who visited the maximum security El Salvadorian prison Cecot was featured in Time magazine. Phil Holsinger joins me now. Philip, bring us into Cecot through the lens of a photojournalist when these first deportations arrived in March 15th.
Hey, Matt. Cecot, I've been here for over a year, and I focused on security. I'm working on a book here. And so I've been in Cecot a lot, and I've been there at night a lot. I've been with, the transfer of over 2,000 prisoners there. This was a little different. This is the first time that people were being flown in on a plane and being taken directly to Cecot, especially foreigners.
What emotions did you witness of the people as they were entering Cecot for the first time and realizing their fate would be as an inmate there?
Well, I think you've been there, haven't you?
I have, but I was never there for the new arrivals. That's why I asked you the question.
So people coming into Cecot, they're generally pretty quiet because they know their fate, and they're usually MS-13, Barrio 18, the worst murderers that you can imagine on earth. And they're being shipped there, cross prison in El Salvador. And so it's usually a pretty quiet arrival, but a lot of change and a lot of pushing to get them in there. This was different because these guys had been in, pretty soft places in the U.S. And I don't know what was in their minds, but I can tell you when they came off the plane, most of them have no idea where they were. And it's pretty shocking to see, 500 policemen and, waiting to take you away. I think that their faces went from defiance to, trepidation pretty quickly.
I also took great note of how your work captured the reactions of the Salvadorians. And I remember the history of these very Salvadorians fighting a war against the gangs, winning that war against remarkable odds where the gangs were highly capable. And you captured a sense of determination in them. What was that like?
Or are you speaking of a specific moment of?
Well, I just saw the facial reaction. You took photos of some of the Salvadorians who were there to receive these Tren de Aragua gang members, and that struck me almost as much as the photos of the Tren de Aragua folks.
Yeah, most of the world has no idea what this country suffered. I mean, these weren't street corner thugs, as you know. These guys operated a a nationwide control, and their protocol was murder. Murder at a level that would give Stephen King nightmares. And I know because I've been interviewing them and looking at their intel files. And so these guys don't play when they bring them in. They know exactly who they're bringing in. And, a lot of their children, a lot of their brothers and sisters have been brutalized and murdered by these murderous gang members. So, yeah, their faces are faces of determination. One point on what I'll call plane number 2, the Venezuelans attempted to overthrow the plane. Homeland Security guy told me it was a weak attempt. It was a weekly attempt, he said, and they didn't succeed. But the Minister of Defense actually, when he heard one of the Venezuelans yelling that he hated him, saying foul words about the president of the United States and the president of El Salvador, he personally went up the gangway onto the plane and took that guy off and delivered him himself, into the hands of the guys waiting.
Yeah, they don't really play around, and they don't have much of a sense of a humor about those things, having endured, like you say, the tremendous casualties of this war. There was a recent visit from the Department of Homeland Security's delegation with Secretary Kristi Noem. You were there to capture that and provide tremendous photojournalism moments. How did the inmates react to Secretary Kristi Noem's arrival and the delegation's trip to Cecot?
So you're the first person I'm going to tell this to. And nobody's said this, but I don't think they would understand it. So when you go to Cecot, which you've been there, there's no talking. The place is the whole discussion of human rights is an open discussion. It's an austere place. But when you walk in, there's no misbehaving. It's the safest prison I've ever been in, and nobody can speak. So the first thing I noticed when we walked into the Venezuelans are kept in a totally different block. And when we walked in, they were quiet, but they were speaking. And that caught me because I wondered, were they given a lesson when they got in there that the MS-13 guys are given, which is you sit down, you stand up when people come in, and you don't speak. Well, these guys spoke. And by the end of the tour, they were actually chanting and calling out for freedom. Now, it wasn't the kind of cries of a person that you feel like is being abused. It was like almost like a soccer stadium cry. But here is my interpretation of it. Nobody's let those guys know that they're not allowed to do that. To me, it was circumstantial evidence that they've kind of been left alone.
No, it's very interesting. But when I was there, the humans who were incarcerated seemed sort of zapped of their humanity. These were some of the worst of the worst. When my colleague Andy Biggs asked one of the wardens there if everyone in the prison had killed someone, the warden said, well, not just one someone. If they're here, they've killed more than one person. But I had never observed a lower state of the human condition than Cecot. I think the second lowest state of the human condition was an AIDS clinic in Haiti I went to once. But as you're capturing these moments, these faces, this tattoo work, and putting out for the world to see, I'm just wondering, how do you want people to feel after seeing your journalism?
It's a good question, because I speak very openly and I write very passionately and I feel very deeply. I have a daughter, and El Salvador is a beautiful place, Matt, and the people, as you've experienced, it's extraordinarily kind, which doesn't correlate to the violence people have been through. And I at times feel a deep hatred because of what I know these men especially have perpetrated on people. It's very difficult for me to look at them kindly. At the same time, suffering is suffering. It's by the grace of God, I'm not in prison like that. I can't tell anyone else how to feel. I have mixed feelings sometimes, but I'll say that Cecot is the best run prison I've ever seen. And I haven't seen any evidence of what some have said of torture and, systematic abuse or anything like that. I mean, see some of these photographs, some of these guys are lean. those were in the early days. And that's when the president said, when they were getting control of the prisons, he said, stop the violence or we're not going to even feed you guys. But they don't even have to do that anymore. But the answer to your question is, I'm not sure how other people feel. I think that nobody can look on suffering, and be happy about it. But at the same time, I think that El Salvador will tell you, even family members of these murderers tell you they are so happy these guys are in jail. The whole country was tortured.
Yeah, that is one of the most interesting dynamics, how people can simultaneously have to grapple with so many of the men of the country being incarcerated while at the same time having such gratitude for liberation. And that's really what El Salvador has here. Your work was recently featured in Time magazine. It's going to have global reach. What was it like having Time focus on this project of yours?
Thanks for that question, because Time is really interesting, and is that, Time has a long tradition, and I'm a very different photojournalist. I photograph on film, I do digital as well, but I'm very old fashioned. I work in an old school way. And my hero was W. Eugene Smith, and he was a Time Life guy. And when Time and I talked about this, I run underground, and I knew publishing just a sliver of my story people would jump on just parts of it, and Time agreed to just publish it as I do it. No photos are altered, and for Time to publish a personal essay in the first person was very unique. But it harkened back to the roots of journalism, which is look at the facts, report first person, and then let the world make up their mind for themselves. And that's what I try to do. I try to bring a person into the place where I am, and sometimes it's not pretty, and I think you can make up your mind yourself about these things.
There will be more deportations to Cecot if the Trump administration gets its way through all of the legal wranglings. Do you continue to stay involved in the reporting on these conditions? And do you plan to report on what happens to the terrorists and gang members that the United States deports to Cecot going forward?
Yes, I hope so, because to me, El Salvador is a story the whole world needs to see. It's a complex story. There's beautiful parts and there's horrible parts. When I say horrible, it's horrible what the gangs have done here. So yes, I'm here, and I hope to stick around and keep reporting as long as I'm welcome in the country to do so.
Well, I think you will be, because I think that when you've had such a remarkable transformation, you want to show the world that transformation is possible. And while these are graphic and searing moments, they're also the moments that tell you how you have to get there, how you have to cause that victory. And there are a lot of heroes that you certainly have been chronicling, and a lot of monsters. And to do so side by side is quite a feat and quite an act of journalism. Philip Holsinger, thank you so much for the insights you've brought us and for coming on the program to share them.
Thank you, Matt.